on to your butts.
In recent years, we've been flooded by this almost new form of media that takes elements of iconic pop culture from our past and reinvents it for a modern audience. While there are tons of shows that do this adequately, I always come back to Adult Swim's provocative programming. If we take a look at Adult Swim's first original production, Space Ghost Coast to Coast, you'll see what I'm talking about. In SGCTC, they lifted characters from the Hanna-Barbera action cartoon Space Ghost to interview actual people. It was hilarious, surreal, and altogether different. Moving forward, Adult Swim would use once recognizable characters or franchises and reinvent them for an adult audience. They went onwards to create, or maybe I should say recreate, classics like C-Lab 2021 and Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law. Adult Swim's satirical repurposed cartoons are definitely not for everyone, but I think for those in their 20s, 30s, heck, even maybe those that grew up on these classics might find these shows refreshing in a, hey, I remember this, but now it's way more mature kind of way. Adult Swim went on to produce a show that would use both a known series and its characters, but would also be something entirely new. That show was The Venture Bros. Venture Bros is an action comedy drama that chronicles the adventures of the two titular foolish yet kind-hearted brothers, Hank and Dean Venture, alongside their selfish super scientist father, Dr. Thaddeus Rusty Venture, and his hyper-violent beefcake bodyguard, Brock Samson. The show was a collaborative effort between Jackson Public and Doc Hammer, and that's Patrick Warburton. He voices Brock.
This is getting stupid!
Who originally planned Venture Bros to be more like a direct parody of the classic Hanna-Barbera action-adventure cartoon Jonny Quest, both in substance and style. As a kid who grew up watching reruns of Jonny Quest and was way too into superheroes, Venture Bros immediately caught my attention. I was very pleased that it captured the aesthetic of the classic action cartoon, but also had the writing and sensibilities found in modern media. At the same time, I feel like I have to stress that at first glance, does Venture Bros appear to be tonally in line with Jonny Quest. To be absolutely straightforward, it is anything but kid-friendly. Lots of boobs, gore, and, adult discussions. Early seasons feel like you're revisiting adventures seen in Jonny Quest, albeit with some strange twists, like the family seeking to salvage a sunken deep underwater ship but are attacked by pirates. Except they're pirates in goofy attire and silly voices only. Alongside these satirical episodes, there are many that delve into a character's backstory or further develop the insane yet fascinating world. As the series went on, it leaned further away from being a Jonny Quest spoof and something wholly new. In doing so, Venture Bros became less about a family taking on adventures, but rather a group of people dealing with the repercussions of their past and the shadowy organizations that mold their future. When directly comparing the main cast of Jonny Quest and Venture Bros, it's easy to pick up on the similarities between the two. But in actuality, the Venture Bros family is more so modeled after Jonny Quest than directly fitting the molds of each character. Take Dr. Venture for example. You'd presume he'd fit the father scientist role that Dr. Quest filled expertly, but Dr. V is actually more in line with Jonny. In the mythos of Venture Bros, Rusty, Dr. Venture now, was the boy adventurer to his super scientist father, Dr. Jonas Venture Sr., who went on many adventures alongside a sorted group of scholars and heroes aptly named Team Venture. And that's where the boys learn this catchphrase.
Yo, Team Venture!
Now, the adventures Jonny went on with his family were fun and in some ways inspiring, but for Rusty, his boy adventures were anything but fun. And then there's the long shadow cast by his deceased father. You see, Dr. Jonas Venture Sr. wasn't just a great super scientist, he was the super scientist. Unfortunately for Rusty, it makes it incredibly hard to try to live up to the world's expectations set by his dear old dad. Dr. Venture is only super scientist in title alone. He rarely has anything new to invent, instead selling old inventions of his father's to make ends meet. Yikes. To be fair, it's not as depressing as I'm making it out to be. Sure, Dr. V in a lot of ways is a failure, but his scrappy and sassy personality make up for great moments, and in a way, lets his kids be more than what he was, a boy adventurer. But for the most part, he's a self-centered shitty dad. Yikes. Anyways, the two boys, Dean and Hank, are very much the boy adventures you expect. However, they feel more of a Hardy Boys kind of role in that they tend to hone in on solving mysteries rather than fight monsters. Dean is the more book smart of the two, like if Peter Parker dressed up like Buddy Holly and was also the furthest thing from Spider-Man. So, a sensitive sweater vest wearing nerd. Between the two, Dean is more likely to understand what's going on in any crazy sci-fi situation, but is 1000% more likely to run away and hide. His brother Hank, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. Hank is far more adventurous, athletic, street smart, and surprisingly musically inclined. And stuff. I probably shouldn't be declaring this, but he's kind of my favorite.
Dean, my pants are on fire!
Did I mention that Hank is unnaturally stupid? While each Venture Bro has some defining traits, they both are huge, wide-eyed babies in regards to how the world really works, outside of what they've experienced in adventures and fighting off creepy supervillains. It becomes endearing seeing both Hank and Dean develop as they are thrust into a world they are not prepared for. And I've saved the best family member for last, Brock Samson. I don't think Brock bends the race Bannon mold, although he's more like a pro wrestler combined with what I imagine Tarantino would want James Bond to be, but rather he makes being a bodyguard way cooler and way more super violent. About the mullet. It's Brock's most defining feature, aside from, I don't know, his huge size, and gives him this awesome 70s super cop vibe. Despite how awful mullets truly are, Brock is the only man alive that pulls it off and always looks epic. When the family is faced with bad guys, Brock is the man that will get the job done and protect the family. And every time he does, it's the hypest. Legit, the Johnny Quest look pulled me in, but the direction of the action scenes and the creative ways Brock kills dudes is what truly got me invested. The action, like Brock Samson, is without a doubt the hypest element of Venture Bros. And while it's not as pronounced as other components of the show, it is always satisfying. In Johnny Quest, there was an abundance of villains or monsters that the family would have to deal with. Venture Bros flips the script on that by giving the Ventures a central villain to deal with, the Monarch. The Monarch is a villain whose centerpiece theme is the Monarch butterfly. And yes, it is as non-threatening and lame as it sounds, but please, for the love of God, do not tell the Monarch that. What I love about the Monarch is that he looks and acts like your classic supervillain you'd spot in your Saturday morning cartoon. He's loud, dramatic, has a stupid costume, but sometimes he's surprisingly capable and even awesome. I love that they make the leading villain walk the line of hugest loser and coolest guy ever. Makes for a bad guy you want to root for. And I haven't even mentioned how the Monarch and his group of subordinates have a lot of screen time. They're kind of the other half of the show, and in some ways they are just as compelling, if not more so, than the Venture family. Also, his girlfriend, Dr. Girlfriend, is easily one of the hottest characters in the show. Just, pay no mind to the voice.
You're going to take advantage of me, aren't you? Well, be quick with it.
The Monarch is among a group of characters that have a long-standing history with Rusty Venture, all wanting to enact vengeance upon him for one reason or another. A lot of these characters have history, and as the show marches on, you find pieces of the backstory that somehow entangled this large cast of characters together. It's an aspect of the character relationships and world building that makes Venture Bros a gripping show that is seriously hard not to binge. When first jumping into Season 1 of Venture Bros, it feels unsure of what it wants to be. There's great moments that feel like a passing homage to Johnny Quest, comic books, movies, and
Even more?
all the while fleshing out its own world, establishing characters, they are interlacing relationships, and hint at elaborate backstories. There's a lot going on. Because of that, it's easy to think the creators were using references as a cheap way to pull an audience in rather than tell a story. And you wouldn't be wrong for thinking that. Despite earlier seasons leaning heavily on references, later seasons fortunately use references in a way that doesn't overshadow the new material, rather work as a launchpad for jokes while the story can move along. In a 2013 interview, Doc Hammer explains the essence of Venture Bros and why it works.
Comics, music, it's all culture, and that's what the show is about. That's kind of what our show is about. It's not a direct parody of anything but the crap we ingested in our lives, and then we cough it up in jokes.
This really speaks to the heart of the show. It's a means of creating a world to inhabit a bunch of cool stuff that the creators grew up with and love. While their fondness for comics, Duran Duran, or whatever isn't something everybody can relate to, I think you can still appreciate the passion coursing throughout this silly show. Granted, as fun as it is to feel like you're in on a private joke by catching a reference in a one-liner, if you're not familiar or not interested in vaguely nerdy pop culture stuff like Star Wars, superheroes like Wonder Woman, iconic anime like Voltron, Venture Bros might not be for you. The references go a whole lot deeper than those I mentioned, but also cover a variety of other stuff too. If none of this turns you away, you are likely to get a whole lot of mileage out of VB. Speaking of which, the more you watch a show, it becomes clear how much work the creators put into carefully crafting every single detail as a subtle reference to cool shit in pop culture. For example, the Monarch's henchman's design was influenced by Jack Kirby's iconic X-Men design. All of this allows people to become attached to the show in almost a secondary way. The anticipation of new characters and figuring out what inspired their design, or even trying to decipher passing references in dialogue, is an absolute blast. More importantly, the references allow Public and Hammer to build a world that, in line with one of the main themes of Venture Bros, feels familiar but is also very different. One of my favorite examples of this is David Bowie. He comes up a surprising amount of times throughout Venture Bros, and without saying too much, is kind of a huge villain. Yeah, that's kind of a spoiler, but if you know anything about Bowie, it was that the man was as awesome as he was mysterious. Believe me when I say, there's a lot more to this character than me just saying he was a cool bad guy. The tiny details that establish the world and the large cast of Venture Bros may be due in part to references, and while that may appear to be a detriment to the writing, it allows for creativity in making something new from the iconic. So far, what I've laid out makes Venture Bros sound intense and like an awesome action show. But VB is equal parts comedy. Tons of ha-has come from character interactions, and most of the cast being failures. They sometimes have a hard time achieving their goals, they're stupid, and occasionally are victims to slapstick humor. Their failures also add to how strikingly different they are from their Johnny Quest counterparts. The Quest family was always capable of solving a mystery, while the Ventures are sometimes incapable of fully understanding what's going on. In line with references seen throughout Venture Bros, there's meta commentary on the references themselves. Another not so common comedic bit is a subversion in the execution of a joke or an action scene.
I have more bullets, you know. You gotta stop doing that.
Yeah, I know, just looks so cool.
These moments are due to the cast being a group of morons than anything else, but are still very effective, especially in Brock scenes. The comedy, while a bit bleak at times, gives us sufficient but endearing reasons to laugh at the stupid stuff the Ventures get caught in. As Season 7 wrapped up in 2018, there is no better time to dive into the insanity that is Venture Bros. It might sound convoluted and hackneyed in some ways, but if you're willing to give the show a chance, you might be pleasantly surprised. As a parody and reimagining of Johnny Quest, I think Venture Bros succeeds in creating not only a very good satire, but also something wholly unique and very good on its own. You can find Venture Bros on AdultSwim.com, Amazon, YouTube, iTunes, Vudu, and Hulu. Who knows, after watching a few episodes, you might be triumphantly yelling, "Go Team Venture!" Just like me! Just kidding. I'd never do something so lame. I'd maybe half-heartedly say, "Go Team Venture" with an eye roll like Brock Samson, but that's just a facade. Deep down, I realize that saying a stupid catchphrase is just a way to celebrate being a part of something, and that is never lame.